If you suspect yourself of having some kind of genetic disease that runs in your family, do not rely on 23andMe. There is discrimination against people who are trying to survive. Hello, welcome back to the Crossover Connections with a Jack Wang podcast. My name is Jack and I'm an Australian scientist and professor. The recent report in Australia shows that Australians are choosing not to have tests or partake in medical research because they fear the results might affect their life insurance premiums or prevent them from accessing certain health coverage. And of course, that's very dangerous. And the example they use in the article is a gene called BRCA1, BRCA1, which has a very, very strong correlation, if not causation, with different forms of breast and ovarian cancers. So for women, it's very important to go through and do this BRCA1 screening. If you do it in time, it could very well save your life. But this knowledge is very specific to one type of genetic disease. So in this case, it makes sense to do this genetic screening, not to do it lightly, but it should be part of something that you talk with your GP every year to navigate how at risk you are for certain diseases. But people are afraid that once they do the test, the health insurance companies will misuse that information and then double the premiums they have to pay for health insurance or life insurance. And really in Australia, we do not have that much protection against this kind of insurance company shenanigans. And the Federal Parliament Committee in Australia in 2018 recommended the use of predictive genetic tests results in life insurance underwriting to say that this should be banned. You should not be able to use genetic testing to influence life insurance policies or premiums. But really, there is not very strong guideline at all. In Australia, genetic tests can't be collected by the insurer for policies up to 500,000 Australian dollars. And if this is a life insurance policy, that's nothing. Like $500,000 really won't cover most people's ability to pay a mortgage for more than 5 to 10 years at most. So if this was supposed to cover your whole life, this really won't apply. Most people's life insurance policies will be higher than $500,000. So what that means is most people's life insurance policies will be influenced by genetic tests if that is available. And let's say you go and do a genetic test, you find out that you are at risk of a disease, and then you choose not to disclose that to your insurance provider. And for some reason, you decide to make a claim later on, or your family makes a claim. They will go through and dig through your medical records and find out that you knew about this risk and void that whole claim. That's really, really dangerous precedents that these types of regulations are setting out, and understandably so. People feel like they should not be dipping their toe into the pool of doing their own genetic tests to screen against these diseases because it will affect all of their perceptions from healthcare providers as well as from their insurers. There is discrimination against people who are trying to survive. If they have bowel, liver, and breast cancer, like this particular woman in the article has, and they want to encourage their own family members to go screen for these cancers because there's a family history of it, then this type of survival mechanism, this preemptive understanding of your own biology to protect yourself, is being discriminated against financially. The UK and Canada apparently are better protected in terms of consumer protections for insurance agencies having access to your genetic testing than other countries are. The idea that we are more vulnerable really highlights that this problem is not something that we can fix at a personal level, because personally, what you should be doing is getting all the facts about your own personal health and taking responsibility for it. I would say doing a whole of body, whole of genome screening test isn't that effective, but if there are known cases of this disease in your family that has a genetic component, doing the screening test will allow you to protect yourself over the long term. And if that means a slightly higher premium, that might be a price you have to pay. So again, this is not something that the individual can fix. It should be really on the regulatory front. The government and the governmental agencies and the experts should really be lobbying for tougher regulations that ban the connection between insurance company premiums and predictive genetic testing. But this is a very specific set of tests that have a very strong diagnostic function in the case of something like breast cancer. Which brings me to the last article in this series of headlines that we'll talk about today, which highlights the accuracy and reliability of these genetic tests that you can buy online. Online DNA tests extremely unreliable at detecting rare disease-causing genetic variations. The technology used in genetic testing is something called SNP chips, and their primary job is to scan the whole genome very quickly, because that is as much as that $200 kit can afford to do across your whole genome. So you're looking for superficial differences, because if you really wanted to scan every single base pair in the genome, you could do it, but it would cost way more than a couple of $100 in these SNP chip analysis. I would say that if it was done by the right service and it was done by a proper sequencing platform where it's got amazing coverage, then you could bring that cost down as well. But really, at the level that 23andMe is pitching it at, it is very unreliable for detecting rare genetic variants. So for instance, they give again the example of the BRCA1, the breast cancer gene. The SNP chips, which is the technology used by companies like 23andMe, are not reliable at all in detecting those variants. So if you suspect yourself of having some kind of genetic disease that runs in your family, do not rely on 23andMe. Get the proper genetic test, because the difference in the technology is that proper diagnostic tests will go through and sequence the entire gene in question, thousands of base pairs. Will go and sequence every single base pair, if not your whole genome, but really it needs to be targeted at that one area in the gene that will tell you every single base pair there and highlight it and compare it to all of the other known variants, all of the other different versions of that gene that may cause a disease. The 23andMe SNP chip type test it's just sampling a very small portion of the genome, looking for the sections that might have very obvious tweaks, but it is not looking or doing a deep dive on any one gene. That's the difference between the commercial DNA kits versus doing a very detailed diagnostic test that has been developed by many scientists over time. SNPs and SNP chips are not the right tool for the job. They're good for finding genome-wide associations, but they're not good for seeing if your individual version of this gene is prone to disease. That is way more detailed work that requires an in-depth test. Australians are taking genetic information provided to them through direct-to-consumer tests and putting them into third-party websites to try to determine if they have a rare disease causing genetic variation. And the test and technology is just not robust enough for anything to be interpreted correctly. So if you're in fear of this, it's actually going to make you have way more anxiety around your health than the intended purpose of trying to protect yourself and arm yourself with all the information. So it is much better to go directly to genetic testing services through a family cancer clinic in Australia if you meet the certain family history and you have eligibility to qualify to get this testing. As always, thank you for listening. I'm Jack. Hope to connect with you again next time around.